The sun was sinking below the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the park as Sarah laced up her running shoes. She had always loved this time of day, the way the world seemed to slow down, the colors in the sky shifting from vibrant orange to soft purple, and the peaceful solitude of the park. In her mid-30s, Sarah was tall, with a slender build, the result of years of regular evening jogs. Her long auburn hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and her hazel eyes scanned the path ahead, ready for the familiar route. As she started her jog, the park was quiet, save for the distant chirping of crickets and the gentle rustling of leaves. The scent of damp earth and fresh grass filled her lungs as she ran, grounding her in the present. The trees stood like dark sentinels against the fading light, their branches casting eerie shadows on the path ahead. Sarah loved this time, this moment of stillness before nightfall, when the park felt like her own private sanctuary. But then, something strange caught her eye. As she rounded a bend in the trail, she noticed a small figure lying just up the path, partially hidden by the tall grass. She slowed to a stop, her curiosity piqued, and walked over to take a closer look. There, nestled in the grass, was a doll. It wasn't like any doll she had seen before. It looked old, almost ancient, with a cracked porcelain face and wide, glassy eyes that stared up at her with an unsettling, lifelike quality. The doll was dressed in what must once have been an elegant gown, now faded and stained, its fabric frayed at the edges. The hair, made of coarse dark yarn, was tangled and matted, framing its face in a wild, unkempt mess. But it was the doll's mouth that sent a chill down Sarah's spine, a slight, almost imperceptible smirk, as if it knew something she didn't. For a moment, she just stood there, staring down at it, feeling a strange mix of unease and fascination. What was a doll like this doing here? It seemed so out of place, so wrong. But she shook off the feeling, telling herself that it was just a doll, probably dropped by some kid who had been playing in the park earlier. Without thinking too much about it, Sarah picked it up. It felt heavier than she expected, solid and cool in her hands. As she held it, she couldn't shake the feeling that those unblinking eyes were watching her, even though she knew it was impossible. Trying to dismiss the growing discomfort gnawing at the back of her mind, she decided to take the doll home. Maybe she could clean it up, give it to a friend who collected antiques, or maybe she just didn't want to leave it there, abandoned in the darkening park. Sarah finished her jog with the doll tucked under her arm, its presence a strange and unsettling companion. By the time she reached home, the sky had fully darkened and the first stars were beginning to peek out. She set the doll on the shelf in her bedroom, intending to deal with it the next day. Exhaustion from the run and the long day at work was setting in, so she got ready for bed, trying to push the unsettling image of the doll out of her mind. That night, Sarah fell asleep almost immediately, the soft patter of rain against the window lulling her into a deep slumber. But her sleep was restless, filled with vague, unsettling dreams that she couldn't quite remember when she woke. It was in the early hours of the morning when she felt something, an inexplicable sensation that pulled her from sleep. When she opened her eyes, the room was dark, save for the faint glow of the streetlight filtering through the curtains. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw it. The doll was no longer on the shelf where she had left it. Instead, it was sitting at the foot of her bed, its glassy eyes fixed directly on her. Sarah froze, unable to comprehend what she was seeing. The doll, it had moved. But how? Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Had she moved it in her sleep? No. That didn't make sense. She hadn't touched it since she set it down, and yet there it was, closer now, as if it had silently crept across the room while she slept. Before she could react, the doll lunged at her. Its small porcelain hands grabbed hold of her ankles with a strength that didn't seem possible. Sarah screamed, thrashing against it, but it held on tight, yanking her off the bed with a force that knocked the wind out of her. She hit the floor hard, her head slamming against the nightstand. Pain exploded in her skull, and the world went black. When Sarah came to, she was no longer in her bedroom. She was outside in the woods, the damp earth cold and rough beneath her back. She felt a sharp dragging sensation on her legs and realized with horror that she was being pulled by her feet deeper into the darkness of the forest. Her heart pounded in her chest, every beat echoing in her ears as she tried to process what was happening. The doll was dragging her. It moved with a terrible, unnatural grace, pulling her through the dirt and leaves with ease. Its once lifeless eyes now gleamed with a malevolent intelligence, and its mouth had twisted into a grotesque smile. Sarah tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her throat felt like it was closing up, as if the terror had stolen her voice. As they moved deeper into the woods, the doll suddenly stopped and turned to face her. It raised one tiny hand to its lips and whispered, "Shh, no one will ever believe you." The sound of its voice, high-pitched and eerie, sent a wave of cold terror through her. And then, just as suddenly as that started, the dragging stopped, and everything went black again. When Sarah woke up, she was in a hospital bed, the harsh, sterile light glaring down at her. Her head throbbed with pain, and her body felt heavy and sluggish. A nurse stood by her side, her face a picture of concern. "You're awake," the nurse said softly. "How are you feeling?" Sarah blinked, trying to make sense of where she was. What happened?" she croaked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You were found unconscious in the park," the nurse explained. "It seems you fell and hit your head while jogging. Someone found you and called an ambulance, but don't worry, you sustained no major injuries." The nurse's words made no sense to Sarah. Fell? Hit her head? No, that couldn't be right. She remembered going home, finding the doll. The doll. Her heart raced as the memory of the night came flooding back. "But the doll," she murmured, her voice trembling. There was a doll. It attacked me." The nurse gave a sympathetic look, her eyes softening. "You've been through a lot, but it's possible that what you experienced was just a dream," she said gently. "The mind can play tricks on you, especially after a head injury." Sarah wanted to argue, to insist that it wasn't a dream, but the more she thought about it, the more uncertain she became. Had it all been in her head? Had she imagined the whole thing after falling? The nurse left, leaving her alone with her thoughts, confusion swirling around like a fog. When Sarah was finally discharged and returned to her apartment, it was early in the morning. The first thing she did was rush to her bedroom, heart pounding in her chest. But the doll was gone. The shelf where she placed it was empty, and there was no sign of it anywhere in her apartment. Maybe it had all been a dream, she told herself. Maybe her mind had conjured up the entire terrifying encounter after she had passed out in the park. Days passed, and Sarah started to feel better, both physically and mentally. The memory of that night became hazier, easier to dismiss as some bizarre, stress-induced nightmare. Eventually she felt well enough to resume her evening jogs, hoping that returning to her routine would help her shake off the lingering unease. But then, on one fateful evening, as she jogged along the familiar trail, she came to a sudden stop. Her breath caught in her throat, and her heart skipped a beat. There, lying in the exact spot where she had first found it, was the doll. It was the same cracked porcelain face, the same lifeless glass eyes, the same sinister smirk. Sarah's blood ran cold, and she felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She stood frozen, unable to move, her mind racing with fear and disbelief. How could this be possible? Was it really all just a dream? Or had something far more sinister happened that night? Sarah never ran that trail ever again.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed these stories, please like and subscribe for more.